the moment my son told me I wasn't welcome at my own grandson's christening. I was standing in my kitchen holding a casserole dish I had spent 2 hours preparing. "Mom, it's just, Felicity's family has certain expectations about the ceremony. It's going to be a small, intimate gathering." His voice on the phone sounded rehearsed, polished in a way I didn't recognize. "We'll have you over after, maybe the following weekend." "Maybe the following weekend." I set the casserole down very carefully on the counter. Outside my kitchen window, October rain moved quietly across the rooftops of our neighborhood, in Halifax, the same neighborhood where I had raised my son Nathan alone for 23 years. I didn't cry, not right then. I just stood there with oven mitts still on my hands, listening to my own breathing. "Okay," I said softly. "I understand." I didn't understand, not even a little. But mothers learn very early how to swallow the things that break them. My name is Elaine Mercer. I'm 64 years old. I have silver hair I stopped apologizing for a long time ago, and for most of my adult life, one person has been the absolute center of my world. My son Nathan. He was 7 years old when his father and I separated. Not a dramatic split. No screaming. No affairs. Just two people who had grown into entirely different directions without noticing until the distance between them had become permanent. Jeffrey left for Vancouver with a quiet handshake and a promise to stay involved that slowly unraveled over the following years into birthday cards and the occasional strained phone call. So it was just the two of us. I worked as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized accounting firm in Halifax for most of Nathan's childhood. The hours were long and the pay was modest, but I was good at my job, and the firm was patient with me during school pickups and sick days and the dozen small emergencies that come with raising a child alone. I packed Nathan's lunches every single morning until he was 12 and started insisting he was old enough to do it himself. I drove him to hockey practice 3 mornings a week at 5:30 in the dark. I sat through every parent-teacher interview, every school concert, every awkward teenage phase, every disappointment. I remember one particular November evening when Nathan was 15. He had failed a math test badly enough that his overall average was in danger. He sat at the kitchen table that night with his textbook open and his head down, and I pulled up a chair beside him and we worked through every problem together until almost midnight. At one point, he looked over at me and said, "Mom, don't you ever get tired?" I laughed. "Every single day," I told him. "Now, show me problem 14 again." He smiled at that. Nathan had always had a wonderful smile. By the time he graduated from Dalhousie with a law degree, I had cried harder than he did at the convocation. Not from sadness, from relief. From the particular joy of watching someone you love become more than you ever dared imagine. I paid every tuition bill myself. When he passed his bar exam on the first attempt, I framed the certificate and hung it in my living room before he even thought to ask for it. For years after he started practicing at a firm in downtown Halifax, we had dinner together every Sunday. He called me on Tuesday evenings just to talk. He brought me flowers on my birthday without being reminded. He was, in every way that mattered, a good son. Then he met Felicity Alderton. At first, I tried to like her. I genuinely did. She was beautiful in a particular composed way. Dark hair always perfectly arranged. Clothes that looked expensive without being showy. A voice that stayed exactly the same volume in every situation. She worked in wealth management and came from a family that had lived in the same large house in Armdale for 3 generations. Her father, Gerald Alderton, had a name that appeared occasionally in the business section of the newspaper. The first time Nathan brought her to my house for dinner, she arrived with a bottle of wine that I later noticed cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She complimented my home carefully. The kind of compliment that sounds warm but contains something slightly clinical underneath it. "It's cozy," she said, looking at my living room. "Very lived in." I smiled and offered her a seat. The first warning sign came about 4 months into their relationship, at a birthday dinner for Nathan's closest friend. I had known Patrick since Nathan was 12. He'd eaten at my table more times than I could count. The restaurant was nice but not extravagant, and I was happy to be included. Felicity arrived late, kissed Nathan on the cheek, and then, very quietly, while looking at the menu, said something to him I was not supposed to hear. I didn't realize it would be quite this casual. Nathan said nothing. He just nodded slightly. That nod bothered me more than the words. Over the following months, small changes began appearing in Nathan like hairline cracks in a wall. His wardrobe shifted. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a river changes course. He started mentioning people I didn't know in contexts I couldn't follow. Felicity's family had a summer property on the South Shore. Her father's firm managed accounts for clients whose names I recognized from the news. Her mother, Catherine Whitmore. Felicity had kept her mother's surname professionally, sat on 2 charitable boards, and expected certain social appearances to be maintained. Certain social appearances. Nathan began using that phrase himself after a while. I noticed it the first time he said it about something I'd suggested. A small backyard barbecue with some of my neighbors and old friends of his. Mom, I don't think that's really, Felicity and I are trying to maintain certain social appearances right now. With the firm and everything, it might look a bit. He didn't finish the sentence. A bit what? I asked. He looked uncomfortable. Simple. I had heard that word used that way before, by a different person in a different decade. It landed in almost exactly the same place. Their wedding was lovely, I will say that. The Alderton family handled the arrangements almost entirely, which I understood at the time to be generosity and now understand differently. My role was peripheral and politely defined. I sat in the 4th row. I was not consulted on flowers or seating or music. The morning of the ceremony, Felicity's mother approached me near the venue entrance and said with great warmth, "Elaine, you must be so proud of what Nathan has become." The way she said it, what Nathan has become, as if he had arrived at his current self, despite his origins rather than because of them. I smiled and said I was very proud. After the wedding, I told myself things would settle. That Nathan was simply navigating a new chapter and finding his footing. That love sometimes asks people to compromise. That I was perhaps being too sensitive, too attached to the way things used to be. I told myself a great many things that weren't true. The Sunday dinners stopped first, not abruptly, they tapered. Every other week, then once a month, then an occasional rescheduled visit that never quite materialized. The Tuesday phone calls became texts. The texts became shorter. I started to feel the particular loneliness of a relationship that is technically still intact, but has been quietly hollowed out. I tried not to make it difficult for him. I accepted the changes with as much grace as I could manage. I told myself he was busy, that building a marriage requires energy, that I should not be the kind of mother who clings. But then Felicity became pregnant, and I believed, the way mothers always seem to believe in the face of evidence, that everything would soften again. Grandchildren have a way of reminding people what matters. I spent 3 months knitting a blanket for the baby, cream-colored with small cable stitches running through the center. A pattern my own mother had taught me. I found a photograph of Nathan at 3 days old, asleep against my chest in the maternity ward at the old Victoria General. I had it reprinted and framed, wanting to give it to Felicity quietly, mother to mother, the first time she held her own child and understood what that wait means. I had no idea what was waiting for me. When Oliver was born on a Thursday morning in late February, I drove to the IWK with a gift bag over one arm and my heart beating fast with something close to joy. The hallways smelled like antiseptic and warm blankets. I had pressed my best blouse that morning. I had checked my reflection twice before leaving the house. Not because I cared about impressing anyone, only because Felicity had become so particular about things lately, and I didn't want to give anyone a reason to look sideways at me. Nathan met me in the corridor outside the room. He looked exhausted and happy in the way new fathers do, and for one moment, I simply saw my son, the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with his hockey skates still on his feet. "He's beautiful," Nathan said. "Absolutely beautiful." I touched his arm. "Can I go in?" Something passed across his face, something I almost missed. "Mom, give it a few minutes. Felicity's parents are in there right now, and she needs a bit of quiet." I nodded. "Of course, I'll wait." I waited in that corridor for 40 minutes. I watched a nurse pass 3 times. I watched another family celebrate loudly 2 rooms down. I sat in a plastic chair and held my gift bag on my lap and looked at the door to my grandson's room. When Nathan finally came out to get me, something in his posture had changed. He was holding himself differently, carefully. "Mom, Felicity's tired," he said before we even reached the door. "So, just a quick visit, okay?" "Of course," I said again. The room was quieter than I expected. Felicity sat propped up in the bed, Oliver bundled against her in a pale blue hospital blanket. Gerald Alderton stood near the window, and his wife Patricia sat in the chair beside the bed with the settled authority of someone who had already decided the room belonged to her. I smiled, so hard my face hurt. "He's perfect," I whispered. I moved toward the bed slowly, arms beginning to rise with the instinct that comes before thought. "May I? Actually?" Felicity said, not unkindly but with a finality that landed like a door closing. "We're trying to keep his environment calm right now. The nurses suggested limiting contact." I stopped. I looked at her, then at Nathan. He was studying the floor. "Of course," I said, for the third time that day. Patricia Alderton adjusted Oliver's blanket with the ease of a woman who had been invited to do so. Gerald offered me a polite nod from the window. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything else. I placed my gift bag on the small table near the door and told Felicity she looked wonderful. I told Nathan to call me later. I left the room and made it to the stairwell before my eyes filled completely. I drove home in silence. February sleet moved against the windshield while I kept both hands on the wheel and told myself, quite firmly, that I was overreacting, that hospitals are stressful environments, that Felicity was exhausted, that things would look different next week. But when I checked my phone at a red light, Nathan had already posted a photograph online. Felicity smiling, Oliver in her arms, Gerald and Patricia Alderton beaming on either side, dozens of comments already accumulating. I was not in a single image. I sat in my driveway for a long time after I arrived home. The sleet had turned to snow. Inside my house, the framed photograph of Nathan as a newborn waited on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. The knitted blanket was still folded neatly in the gift bag I'd left at the hospital. I thought about that for a while. Then I opened my phone and called my financial advisor. His name was Stephen Bork, and he had managed my accounts for 11 years. I asked him to review every financial arrangement connected to Nathan. There were more than I had consciously kept track of. The clearest one was the condo. When Nathan and Felicity purchased their home in the South End 3 years earlier, they had come to me with a significant shortfall in the down payment. The housing market in Halifax had climbed sharply, and the area they wanted, close to Felicity's parents, close to the firm, was more than they could cover alone. I had provided $62,000 without a formal loan agreement, because he was my son and we didn't do paperwork between us. I also paid, without much thought, the annual insurance premium on the vehicle Nathan drove, because it had been cheaper when bundled under my policy years earlier and we'd simply never changed it. There were smaller things, too. A professional development course Nathan mentioned offhandedly that I'd covered. A legal conference trip when money was tight at the start of his career. I had not thought of any of these as leverage. I had thought of them as love. Stephen listened carefully. Then he said gently, "Elaine, you should formalize the down payment as a loan, in writing, with the interest rate at minimum." I stared out the window. "He's my son!" "I know," Stephen said, "which is exactly why you need documentation." I didn't call Nathan that night, or the next day. I sat with the discomfort of it, turning it over, looking at it from different angles the way you examine something you've found in your coat pocket and can't quite remember putting there. On the 4th day, Nathan called me. His voice was warm and apologetic, and sounded entirely like himself. "Mom, I'm sorry the hospital was a bit chaotic. Felicity was just overwhelmed. You understand?" "Of course," I said. "That word again. We'd love to have you over on Sunday." Proper introduction to Oliver. I said yes immediately. Of course I did. He was my son, and Oliver was my grandson, and I loved them both more than I could explain without embarrassing myself. But something had changed in me that week. Some quiet thing that I hadn't noticed solidifying until it was already solid. I went to Sunday lunch with a gift and a soft heart, and the best of intentions. And I sat in the beautiful, expensively furnished living room of their South End home and held Oliver for exactly 9 minutes before Patricia Alderton arrived unexpectedly, and the atmosphere of the room reorganized itself entirely around her presence. Nathan brought her tea first. Felicity visibly relaxed when she walked in. I was thanked for coming and offered a second cup of coffee that signaled, politely, that the visit was winding down. I drove home and called my sister Joan. Joan is 3 years older than me and has never owned a single piece of furniture she couldn't afford outright, she said without hesitation. Elaine, they walked you out of your own grandson's christening, and now they're rationing your Sunday visits. What exactly are you waiting for? He's still my son, I said. He is, Joan agreed. And he's also a grown man who has allowed his wife's family to reshape him so completely that you barely recognize him. Those are both true at the same time. I stayed quiet. The down payment money, Joan said. Document it. 3 weeks later, my solicitor, a woman named Frances Okafor I had known professionally for years, prepared a formal promissory note for the $62,000. I sent it to Nathan by registered mail with a short letter that explained my reasoning without accusation or dramatics. I said simply that I thought it was wise, for both our sakes, to have the arrangement in writing. He called me 40 minutes after the letter was delivered. Mom, what is this? It's a loan agreement, I said. For the money I gave you for the down payment, you never called it a loan before. No, I said. I didn't. A long pause. Is this because of the christening? I took a slow breath. Nathan, you told me I wasn't welcome at my grandson's christening because Felicity's family has certain expectations. You have never once asked how I felt about that. So yes, it is partly because of the christening. The silence afterward had texture. Felicity's going to be upset, he said finally. Not I'm sorry, Mom. Not you're right. I should have said something. Just the concern about Felicity's reaction. And I understood in that moment more than I had allowed myself to understand before. The weeks that followed were hard in a quiet way. Nathan didn't call on Tuesdays anymore. When I reached out, the replies came slowly. I heard through my sister that Felicity's parents had taken Oliver to their South Shore cottage for a long weekend. His first trip away, apparently, which I learned from a social media post rather than from my son. But I also noticed something else. Stephen called me one afternoon to flag an irregularity. The vehicle insurance policy, the one Nathan had remained on, had accumulated a secondary charge I hadn't authorized. A minor thing, $140, but Stephen had been thorough. When he looked into it, he found that someone had added a storage unit to my policy several months earlier. A storage unit I knew nothing about and had never needed. I called Nathan. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said Felicity had been meaning to talk to me about that. They needed temporary storage during a renovation. It seemed simpler to add it to my account. Simpler for whom I did not ask. But I removed it, and then I removed Nathan from my insurance policy entirely. Politely, properly, with 30 days' notice. I did not do it in anger. I did it because Frances Okafor had used a word during our last meeting that had stayed with me. Boundaries, not as a therapeutic concept, but as a practical one. A line that defines what belongs to you and what doesn't. Nathan was informed by letter. Felicity called me directly for the first time in 8 months. Her voice was composed and careful. Elaine, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about the storage unit. We certainly didn't mean to. There's no misunderstanding, I said as warmly as I could. I simply needed to simplify my accounts. I should have done it sooner. She paused. Nathan feels like you're pulling away. I nearly laughed at the gentleness of that phrase. Felicity, I said slowly, I have not seen my grandson in 6 weeks. I was excluded from his christening. I found an unauthorized charge on my insurance account. I sent a formal loan agreement that your family appears to find offensive. Which of those actions was mine? She didn't have an answer for that. Not an honest one. What happened next surprised me. A few days after that phone call, Nathan arrived at my house alone. Without calling first. Without Felicity, without Oliver, just my son standing at my front door in his work coat at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening. I let him in. I made tea. We sat at the same kitchen table where we had worked through his math problems 30 years ago. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than work. The careful polish of the last 2 years had thinned slightly, and underneath it was something I recognized. The boy who used to fall asleep on the couch. I owe you an apology, he said, before the tea had even finished steeping. I waited. The christening was? He stopped. Started again. Felicity's parents were very specific about what the event should look like, and I let that become more important than... Another stop. He rubbed his face slowly. I let it become more important than you. I looked at him for a long moment. Why are you here tonight, Nathan? He seemed startled by the directness. Because I wanted to apologize. What changed? He was quiet for a few seconds. Patrick said something to me. He said I'd become someone he didn't always recognize, and that my mom was one of the best people he'd ever known, and I was treating her like a problem to be managed. Patrick, the same boy who'd eaten at my table for years. I made a mental note to buy him a very nice bottle of scotch. Nathan looked at the table. The storage unit thing, I didn't know about that until after. I want you to know that. What do you mean? Felicity handled it, she thought. I don't know what she thought, but I didn't know it was on your account until you sent the letter. I believed him. The trouble with people who care too much about appearances is that they sometimes make adjustments in the background without fully accounting for the people those adjustments affect. I didn't think Felicity was malicious. I thought she had learned to treat the world's resources as tools to be optimized, and she had quietly included me in that category. What does she say? I asked. About your coming here tonight. A long pause. She doesn't know. I wrapped both hands around my mug. Nathan, that's not a small thing, I know. You being here, apologizing to me without telling your wife, that creates a different problem than the one it solves. He looked up quickly. I want my son back, I said, quietly but clearly. All of him. Not a version of you who comes to see me in secret. That's not a relationship. That's compartmentalization. He was quiet for a long time after that. I refilled his tea. Outside, Halifax settled into a cold November dark, streetlights glowing through the kitchen window. Does Felicity know? I asked carefully. What it cost me to stand in that hospital corridor for 40 minutes. Does she know what it felt like to drive home alone that night? He shook his head slowly. Have you ever told her? Another long silence. And I watched something shift in my son's face, not dramatically, not all at once, quietly. The way light changes in a room when someone opens a curtain. No, he said. I haven't. Then that's where to start, I said. Not here. There. He left after another hour. I washed both mugs and stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking out at the street, not quite sure what I was feeling. Not victory. It wasn't that. Not entirely relief. Something more complicated. The particular ache of loving someone through a version of themselves you didn't fully recognize. What came next unfolded slowly over the following weeks, the way most true things do. Nathan talked to Felicity. I don't know all of what was said. Some conversations belonged to the people having them. But the silence between Nathan and me began lifting. He called on a Thursday evening, then again the following week. Not with apologies, just conversation. The ordinary kind that I had missed more than I knew how to say. Felicity called me once, on a Sunday afternoon. The call lasted 12 minutes and was not comfortable, but it was honest, in a way our previous conversations had never been. She said she understood that she had made assumptions about what I expected and what I needed, and that she hadn't asked. She said the hospital had been more her parents' event than she had realized, and that she had let things drift in a direction she wasn't entirely proud of. She didn't apologize for the christening directly. But she said, near the end of the call, Oliver should know you properly. That matters to me. I chose to believe her. Not completely, and not without caution. But I chose it. Gerald Alderton's opinion of me did not change overnight, and I did not expect it to. Some people have organized their understanding of the world too thoroughly to reorganize it quickly. But his opinion of me was no longer something I needed to manage. That shift, small as it sounds, changed a great deal. The loan documentation remained in place. Francis Okafor had advised me to keep it, and I agreed. Not as a weapon, not as punishment, but as the simple formalization of what the arrangement had always actually been. A loan. Made with love, but a loan nonetheless. Nathan understood that, I think, better than he had before. Winter moved into spring in Halifax the way it does, grudgingly, then all at once. One morning in late April, I arrived at Nathan and Felicity's house with a bag of groceries and no particular agenda. Felicity opened the door and stepped back without hesitation to let me in. Oliver was on the kitchen floor surrounded by soft blocks. He looked up at me and said nothing. He was only 3 months old, but he tracked my movement with the absolute focused attention that babies have before they learn to be self-conscious. I sat down on the floor beside him. Felicity watched from across the kitchen for a moment. Then she said, "He gets fussy around this time. Would you?" She gestured, a slightly uncertain gesture, but genuine. I picked Oliver up slowly. He settled against my chest, with a small fuss that quieted almost immediately. I felt the particular weight of him, warm and solid, the soft animal heaviness of a sleeping infant. I thought about the 40 minutes in this corridor, about the drive home in the sleet, about the photograph I'd left behind in a gift bag. I thought about my own mother placing me in my grandmother's arms for the first time, a story she told me years later, how my grandmother had cried without making a sound. Felicity sat down at the kitchen table and picked up her coffee with both hands. "He likes you," she said, sounding almost surprised. "We've met before," I said. "He just didn't know it yet." She smiled at that, not her composed, public smile. A smaller one. The real kind. We sat in the kitchen for most of the morning, not talking very much, just existing in the same space in a way that finally felt ordinary. Oliver slept against my shoulder, while Felicity read something on her tablet and intermittently told me small things about his schedule, his preferences, the way he startled at the sound of the oven timer, ordinary things, the kind that build trust by existing, not by being announced. Nathan came home at noon to find us both still there, which seemed to surprise him enough that he stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at the kitchen. "Everything okay?" he asked. "We're fine," Felicity said. She said we without thinking about it, and I noticed that, and I let it be what it was. The loan will be repaid. Not on any dramatic schedule, in manageable amounts, as Nathan and I agreed. What mattered to me was never the money. What mattered was that the arrangement was finally honest, that I finally knew what it was, and so did he. Some things between Felicity and me may always be slightly careful. There are people whose understanding of the world is different enough from yours that a full, uncomplicated friendship is not really available. That's not a failure, it's just an honest accounting. But Nathan is my son again in the ways that matter. He calls on Thursday evenings. He brought Oliver to see me last Sunday and stayed for 3 hours. And we ate soup and watched it snow, and Oliver discovered the cat on my neighbor's porch and lost his mind with delight. I think about the woman I was standing in that hospital corridor, holding a gift bag, watching a door. I think about what I almost did, which was nothing, which was to absorb the hurt quietly and keep paying every cost I was asked to pay and tell myself that this was what love required. Love requires a great many things. I know that. I have spent 64 years learning what they are. But I have also learned later than I perhaps should have, that love does not require you to make yourself smaller so that other people's images stay large. It does not require you to fund a version of your family's life that has no room for you in it. My mother used to say that the people who truly love you will not ask you to disappear. She was right. She was always right about the things that take the longest to understand. Oliver is 4 months old now. He has Nathan's eyes and Felicity's stubbornness and a laugh that sounds like it belongs to someone twice his size. When he sees me, he reaches both arms out before I've even sat down. That, in the end, is what I was waiting for. Not an apology, not a repayment, not an acknowledgement of everything that had been taken and overlooked and quietly erased. Just my grandson, reaching for me, already knowing without being told that I am someone safe to reach for. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.